couple of years ago, I had the privilege of interviewing a young woman who was going through a recovery program at Ottawa Inner City Ministries. The reason she'd been nominated for the interview was because she was one of the more recent stories at the time of life transformation, and we were going to use her story during our Easter service. It took a little coaxing to get her story out because she had a shy demeanor, but in the end she was able to tell it, and the more we got into it, the more I was riveted by it. She'd grown up in a rough situation, had ran away from home with a no-good boyfriend who introduced her to crack and kept her on the habit for most of her teenage years. Ottawa Inner City Ministries, or OIM, first met her through their youth outreach program and tried many times to get her off the street, but she kept getting lured back by her deadbeat boyfriend until she realized that she needed to cut ties with him. At the time that she gave her story, she was not a complete victory story, but she was a victory story. She still had many of the scars from intravenous drug use on her arms that she was trying to hide. Her skin was still healing, but it was not completely back to normal because crack users have a tendency to pick at their skin. Her teeth were on the mend, but she needed a few more visits to a dental physician. She still had the nervous tic that you see on drug users that comes from that comes after years of abusing their bodies. And yet, in spite of that, she still was a victory story. She had asked that when she sat with me to tell her story, the youth worker that had first reached out to her, be present, and also the leader of OIM be present in the room. Not only did they help her tell her story chronologically and keep her thought process on track, but you could see a genuine love between these people. These workers at OIM had journeyed with her for 5 or 6 long years through numerous relapses and never once gave up on her. Their hearts were not callous towards her because of her many failures. Instead, every time that she failed, they had an opportunity to show her love and help her see that she was experiencing victory, doing better, and would eventually be able to leave the cycle of drug use. Sitting in that room, I was suddenly struck by a simple and compelling question. What would a faith community that treats all people, regardless of their hurts and hang-ups, overt and covert, the way this woman was treated, even look like? You see, we've all seen the way churches and faith communities treat people that they feel have sinned. Now, I'm told over and over again that I should not be so negative, but this is one of the areas in which I find it hard to put a positive spin on things. We have an ever-increasing bad track record of where treating people with hurts and hang-ups is concerned, and this needs to change. If you think about it, we all have a bigger addiction than drugs or sex or anger. All of mankind is addicted to sin, and our addiction is so deep and pervasive that it is destroying us, our families, our communities, and the world. The seriousness of our condition cannot be understated, and this is the reason why I think that there is an unspoken cry for a movement or a group of people that would become a safe place for the world to run to. This is the cry that we have felt for some time now, and one of the reasons why we have declared Pivot 613 to be a church whose motto is love first. Growing up in the church, I was told that I could never think like this. I was told that there has to be a limit to grace, mercy, and love. I was told that these traits need to be balanced with truth, as if there is a place of grace, mercy, and love which you can reach, in which truth is impotent, irrelevant, ignored, or simply discarded. Do not sacrifice truth on the altar of unbalanced grace, I've been told. I'm pretty sure that some of you watching this video right now are thinking the exact same thing. What are the limits to grace? What are the limits to mercy? What are the limits to love? When do you start applying the tough medicine of truth? I think it depends on what you define truth as. Some people define truth as pointing out the behavior of people, the bad behavior of people, in the hopes that they will be convicted by the encounter and stop said behavior. I know that for a long time, this is what I understood truth to be. The assumption when you define truth in this manner is either that the person is in denial about their behavior, and its effects on the individual or society, or that the person simply does not know that what they're doing is bad. I will grant you that there are times when people are doing something bad and they simply don't know that it is bad. But those situations are few and far between. In fact, most of the time people really do know that what they're doing is bad. And they have the thousands of voices on TV, at work, on the radio, and on billboards shouting at them about their poor choices. So most of the time when you are speaking truth, you're only heaping guilt on people that already feel horrible about their poor choices or bad behavior. And as we can all pretty much attest, guilt does not lead to changed behavior. Why do you think people react so negatively to the brand of truth that the church so freely and insensitively dishes out? If you think about it, true life change, true behavior change happens when a more powerful force is at work. And I believe that this force is love. Love of self, love for others, or love received is the singular most powerful source of behavioral change. Now, it sounds like I just ripped off a mantra from a 21st century self-help guru, when in fact, all these gurus are simply imitators of the originator, Jesus Christ. And it is this simple fact that Jesus tries so hard to model with his life and pass on to his disciples. I would like, therefore, to propose a different definition of truth, a more correct definition of truth. I believe that Jesus is not just the way, but he is also the truth. He actually used this word as one of the ways to define himself. What, therefore, is the truth? That while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. That if we're in Christ, we're a new creation. The old has gone and the new has come. That it is no longer we who live, but Christ who lives in us. The truth is that nothing can separate us from the love of God. Nothing. The truth is Jesus, his extraordinary life, his death, and his resurrection. The most extravagant show of love that the world has ever seen, simply to let us know that he would rather die than be separated from us. These are not my words. This is not a clever play on semantics. This is Jesus himself, and this is how he chose to reveal himself to us. He, the truth, reveals an incredible well of grace, mercy, and love. And so the truth is, in fact, grace and mercy and love. This is the truth. This is truth. You see, contrary to what is taught a lot, grace, mercy, and love are not to be balanced with truth as if too much of one is bad. I've come to understand that love reveals truth and the truth reveals love. I've come to accept that grace reveals truth and truth reveals grace. And I've come to see that mercy reveals truth and truth reveals mercy. I've also come to understand, accept, and be energized by the call to be a gracious, merciful, and loving person, and to ask people to join me on a God-inspired journey, to be a part of a faith movement whose calling card is love first, and who are a walking embodiment of love that reveals truth, mercy that reveals truth, and grace that reveals truth. Pivot 613 is not just a fearless church, as we found out in our first ever meeting of the year. Pivot 613 is a gracious, loving, and merciful church because Christ has called us to be exactly that. So if we're to become a living, breathing movement of grace and mercy and love to our communities, city, and the world in the same way that Ottawa Inner City Ministries was to the young woman that I told you about a few minutes ago, what would we have to do? What would we have to do? The brokenness of suburbia is hidden, but it's no less destructive than the drug use of people in Ottawa's inner city. What do we have to do to make sure that we do not have a double standard where the addiction to drugs and the addiction to sin is concerned? Here's one practical way that a good friend of mine that many of you are going to get to know at Pivot 613 has said many times since I've met her. She's quoting from the book Blue Like Jazz, and every time she says it, it gets imprinted in my thinking and in my heart a little bit more. She says, when people do something wrong, our natural tendency is to withdraw love. However, instead of withdrawing love, perhaps we should love even more when something wrong is done. After all, it is exactly what Jesus does for us. So one practical way of becoming a gracious and merciful and loving church is by not withdrawing or withholding love when wrong is done, when behavior is questionable, or when sin is present. Instead, those are the moments when our love should shine through, sweep away the guilt, and restore the broken. Where have you been withdrawing love when you should extend it? What are other practical ways that we can not only show, but also embody the call in us to be a gracious, merciful, and loving movement in this city? And what step can you take this week to personally become a more loving and gracious and merciful ambassador of Christ?